So, hi everyone. Thank you for joining and welcome to the Dementia Researcher Salon. My name is Andreia and this is the first time that I'm hosting, so I'm really excited to be here with two great researchers. Just a bit about me. I'm originally from Portugal, but I've been in the UK since 2021. So this salon is about the personal cost of immigrating for science. So this is a topic that I'm really interested in hearing and interesting to talk to both of you. So it's my pleasure to host this week. And as you will know about these sessions, we combine live stream with guest speakers. They will all have a 10-minute to chat. We will ask some questions, and then we will move over to the group chat to exchange ideas. And it's, I think, a really informal chat. So our guest speakers today is Sara. She's a PhD student in Sant Pau Memory Unit, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Neuroimaging core at the University of Barcelona, Universitat Autonoma de Barcelona. My Spanish is really bad. Even though I'm from Portugal, my Spanish is really bad. And Sara is originally from New Zealand, and she moved to Spain to undertake her PhD. Her research is focused on neuroimaging of small vessel disease in Down syndrome and autosomal dominant Alzheimer's disease. That's such an interesting topic. And then we have Marianne Coleman. She is a researcher at the National Centre for Healthy Aging in Melbourne, Australia. Marianne qualified as an orthopedist, which I have to say, I've never heard that before, which is so interesting. I had a Google before the salon. And you graduated in 2008 from the University of Liverpool. After some time in clinical practice, she studied in Liverpool, Glasgow, Surrey, before moving to the University of Melbourne in 2020. That is such interesting career paths. And again, I did my degree in Portugal. I moved to Germany, and then I moved to the UK in 2021. I should say I'm an early career researcher, so I'm in the small steps of finishing my Viva corrections, my PhD corrections. And I research.
Well done.
I know. I'm like, when is it done? And I'm a research fellow at the University of Surrey as well. So, a lot of moving around, and I guess all three of us can testify that immigrating for science promises opportunity, but often it carries a hidden personal cost and economic costs as well. Leaving family behind is always hard. Adapting to a new culture. I remember I had a huge culture shock when I came to the UK, but more the weather shock, to be fair. I'm still getting used to it. And, having to create, new support systems, and it can lead to isolation and pressure, and you have to adapt quickly because you're starting a new job or a PhD or, whatever it is. And it's really balancing that ambition to progress in your career, especially as an academic, and, the emotional toll of having to start over in a new country. So as we explore this journey, we will consider the resilience that we need to make a home in a new country, and ask at what cost do we pursue research abroad, so we can find a balance between taking advantage of these international opportunities and share our experience. But that's enough from me. I do speak a lot. So let's hear from our first speaker, Sara.
All right, let me share my screen and hopefully it will work. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
I got it.
Perfect. Okay, so hi, I'm Sara Zsadanyi. I am actually coming to you live from temporary accommodation as I prepare to move back to my home country. So when I said yes, actually, to the salon topic a few months ago, it wasn't on my bingo card that I'd be in this exact situation while I speak to everyone today. So I am coming to you with a bit of a cautionary tale, but I also hope that I can convince you that if you if you're able to do this right and prepare properly, immigrating for science can be the adventure of a lifetime. So a little bit of backstory. In February 2021, mid-pandemic, I made the decision to move from my country of New Zealand to Barcelona with my partner. And I used to say I moved for love and I stayed for science. But in reality, when I made the decision to move, it was after many, many years of thinking I had outgrown our little island country of 5 million people. Even when I was quite a bit younger, I always dreamed about living in Europe, especially since I was born here and a lot of my family still lives scattered around the continent. So I packed up my life to move to a country I had never been to before, where I didn't speak either of the two official languages of the region, Catalan and Spanish, and also somewhere that I knew I didn't know very much about at all. So obviously, there are things that I would do differently. I was young, I was 22 years old, very excited, but there were things that I would do differently if I were to move again for my career. And I hope that in this chat today, maybe I can tell you a little bit about those things and what you should think about before you make a big move like this. So there are a few main ideas that I wanted to talk about. Obviously, when we talk about the costs of moving overseas, probably the first thing that you really think about is the financial costs. And yes, they are very important. Definitely make sure you spend a lot of time planning, making your spreadsheets, finding out about your new salary, so on and so forth. But I'm no finance guru, so I'm not really qualified to talk about this. But what concerns me more is some of the other costs that come up that are quite hard to quantify until you've actually been through them, through this experience of moving overseas. So I'd like to start off first with a few of the social costs. I feel that one major part is the separation from family and friends. I prepared myself a lot for this separation because I come from a family who's scattered themselves across the world. And my parents, for example, told me many stories about how they managed this separation. And of course, this doesn't just apply to people like us who are moving overseas for research, but we really have to consider that the kind of work that we do is often a little bit isolating and very stressful. So we really need to carefully weigh this up as a factor when we make our decisions. And the other difficult thing about this is that life goes on for the people who are back in our home country. And it's really hard to miss out sometimes. Sometimes you'll feel, for example, I felt the pang of sadness when I missed another one of my nephew's birthdays, or when my friend got a promotion at work and I couldn't be out having a drink and celebrating with her. So obviously, we live in a very well-connected world. And so we have WhatsApp, we've got FaceTime, quick delivery on some care packages, and all these sorts of things, although they can't fully replace the comfort of having your support network around, they can really, really help. For me, making an effort to call my friends and my family at least once a week has been really helpful. And it's also been great that I have got these amazing people in my life who send me gifts, send me postcards, and it's really helped me to get through the last 4 years here in Barcelona. Also, whenever any big moments happen, like birthdays, the internet is an amazing tool for celebrating with your friends and family. I've also found that bringing some parts of my old home with me has helped me with the separation and the feeling of homesickness that comes up quite often. So reading, listening to music from your home country, maybe even making your favorite dish when you need a little bit of extra comfort, all these sorts of things, bringing them into your new apartment or your new house can be very helpful. Then, on the other hand, moving to a new country or a new city is actually a great opportunity to start from scratch a little bit socially. It can be a bit daunting, obviously. You have to go find your new people and build your new support network, but it's actually very, very, very important. One thing that was massively helpful was, of course, creating connections with my new coworkers. These are the kinds of people who could support me through the actual work part of working abroad, as well as logistics, bureaucracy. Some people helped me out with getting a visa, getting residency. And of course, these people are also very, very helpful for your career and all the professional networking that you need to continue in your career. One thing that was pretty helpful at first was immersing myself in these communities of other people who'd moved to Barcelona. But the problem with that was that a lot of these people would miss home at some point and they'd go back. So it's also quite important to think about getting into hobbies and social groups with the people who are actually from this new city. And then, I don't know, maybe you say, okay, I'll do an evening pottery class or go to a run club or a gym. And this could give you a chance to unwind from your busy day while also building up your support network. This also links a little bit to the cultural adaptation and identity struggles that can come up. So beyond just the normal language barriers that I experienced, adapting to cultural norms and expectations is quite challenging. So having these social connections, building your new support network, it becomes very important in this case. There can be people who say, oh, I will help you. I'll help you see what the norms are here. I can show you the ropes. And they won't laugh at your blunders as you try to find your feet and figure out what's normal in your new city or country. And of course, if you have the opportunity before moving to learn a little bit about this new culture that you're going into, that'll help you to feel a lot more prepared. Then there are the emotional costs, quite linked, of course, to the social costs. But one of the major things is mental health considerations. I highly recommend actually the salon talk from last week, I believe it was. They spoke quite a bit about the mental health issues that can come up in academia. And I highly recommend this because they give some really great tips. But of course, moving overseas, this can be very stressful and isolating, and it makes it this perfect storm for some mental health issues to come up. One thing that's been hugely helpful for me, for example, outside of just building up that support network, was swallowing my pride and finding a therapist. She was someone who had a lot of experience working with people in this exact situation. If you are able to, if you find that yourself struggling with mental health and financially you can make this work, I highly recommend it. But even outside of asking a therapist for help, if you have the opportunity to get involved in online communities and have regular check-ins with your support network, this can make a huge difference. Also, a little bit as an aside, one thing I logically knew but didn't really understand was that, of course, physical and mental health are very, very interlinked. And so the additional challenges of having to navigate a new health system or figure out new health issues that might pop up for you, along with all of your major adjustments that you're making in your life, this can be make or break for whether you are able to be happy and continue your life in this new country. One other emotional thing that may come up quite often is this feeling of decision fatigue or burnout. And I find, we're all a little bit different in this sense. Some people absolutely love to be out of their comfort zone, but I still think we all have a limit. At some point, this stress of adjusting to the new environment, the language barriers, cultural differences, and everything, it can start to take quite a toll on your mental health. And something that I wish someone had told me when I first moved is I don't need to figure everything out all at once. I tried learning Spanish, getting my long-term visa, adjusting to the COVID restrictions here, training up for part-time work, all in the first 2 months of arriving, and it was just a little bit too much. Instead, and this is my advice to you that I wish I had heard before, try to tackle one adjustment at a time as much as possible. So if you have the chance, for example, to arrive a few weeks earlier before you have to start your new job, really try to take that opportunity to set yourself up before you start adjusting to the new job that you're doing. Also, you don't need to figure it all out on your own. Try to lean on any support that you can get, whether it's from your HR department or local communities, your friends, and legal aid. I've been really helped by some amazing people who helped me with the bureaucratic procedures that allowed me to stay in the country in the first place. So you don't need to figure it all out on your own or all in your first week. One thing that I never thought would be applicable to me, but I just wanted to mention here was wrestling with this feeling that I needed to go back home. So over the past 4 years, I'd say I've never fully felt happy living here, although I've had a great time and I'm really grateful for everything that's happened. And then compounding issues last year, health struggles, all of these things made me realize that the best possible decision for me to make at this point is actually to go back to my home country. And obviously, this was a really difficult decision for me to make, but I was pleasantly surprised that everyone around me, on the whole, has said, this sounds like the right decision for you. So I hope this is never applicable for any of you who are listening in today, but I just wanted to let you know that there's absolutely no shame at all in sticking it out for a few months or a few years and then deciding, you know what, I need to actually go back to my support and to my family and my friends. So with all this said, you might be wondering, is it even worth it? And I know maybe I sound a little bit negative right now, but honestly, the answer for me is still yes. I don't regret it at all. Moving in abroad has been one of the most enriching experiences of my life. I was able to experience new cultures, meet people from all over the world, and push myself in ways that I could never have imagined. In terms of the career itself, this experience opens new doors that won't be available to you otherwise. So because of my time here and the encouragement from my supervisors, from my colleagues, from my partner, I've met hundreds of potential new collaborators. I've been involved in volunteering work with the Alzheimer's Association, and I've also traveled to many, many different countries around Europe, all in the name of science. So I think the fact that you're putting yourself out there, you're getting to know a new place, you're demonstrating this ability to work despite all the stress and all the difficulties that could come up. This really shows that you're the kind of person worth hiring and worth investing in as well. And lastly, despite all of the sacrifices, there's just something incredibly rewarding about knowing you took a risk and you made it work, that you built yourself a new life in a completely new place. So, bottom line, is immigrating for science worth it? Absolutely. But with a caveat, make sure you understand these challenges, be prepared to build up your new networks while you're keeping in touch with the old ones, and always, always reach out for help when you need it. And I think if you do all of these things, I think really it can be the adventure of a lifetime.
Thank you, Sara. That was great. I do have a couple of questions for you, and Marianne, feel free to join us as well. I really relate to a lot of the things that you said, specifically around mental health. I've been away from my own country for maybe since 2017, on and on. And I never thought about going back, but I also, until recently, I never realized where my place is. Where, I feel like we have more than one home in a way. You grow so much in, different cities or different countries. But until recently, I've never felt at home in the UK. And I think a lot of it, even though I really enjoyed my PhD experience, I remember not feeling, it was just not my place at all. I did my PhD in Bradford. I was living in Leeds. I met great people. I had great supervisors. But I remember struggling so much because I just did not feel at home. And yeah, the culture shock is a lot. And what I could relate was that feeling of shame of having to go home so often. Obviously, I'm fortunate to do that because I live so close by, the UK and Portugal is Europe. And you both probably cannot do that. But I felt such shame to be like, when I was struggling a bit, having to go home to the nest even though I've been away for so long.
No shame. No shame.
No shame at all. No.
No, I'm literally flying back to the UK next week to see my family. So no shame. No shame.
Yeah, but it's hard, right?
Something that people don't talk about very often. I mean, I have been friends with so many people who sort of drop it onto me that, oh, I'm actually thinking about going back home. I've bought tickets back home and I don't think I'm going to stay in Spain. And I think, oh, okay, that's a shock to me. Why did we not talk about this before? Because it's something, yeah, people do seem to feel quite a bit of shame around it, like you failed somehow.
Yeah.
But it's not a failure. It's amazing to, not many people do this voluntarily, to go and live somewhere else around the world. And it's very, very difficult. And so there shouldn't be a feeling of shame there. It should be, I tried something, I did something really, really difficult, and I'm a stronger person for it at the end of the day. But now it's time for me to go back to my family and my friends, my sense of comfort, I think.
Yeah. That's great, because that's so, again, you don't, I remember just before I finished my Viva and just before I started corrections, I had this massive identity crisis, because I was like, I moved to this country for this reason, to do the PhD, and I had ups and downs, and I'm a better person for it. And even before that, I was in Germany. I never really thought about going back, but it was when I was here and after that I was like, I just don't have my support system, and what kind of person am I if I'm not here to do that? And nobody really talks about it, and it's so powerful that you understood that. And yeah, you have no shame in going back, as you shouldn't have anyway. And my question before we hear from Marianne is, what was your biggest sort of a culture shock? And maybe I missed that in your presentation, because New Zealand and Spain, it's very different, I would assume.
Yes, very. It's almost difficult to think back. I mean, because it's been 4 years at this stage, and now I do feel like I've kind of, in a sense, become a little bit of a Spaniard. So I'm quite well adjusted, and I do like the way of life here. But I think, and I don't know if I would consider this a culture shock, but I come from a part of New Zealand that's incredibly quiet, where everybody lives in houses, and I guess we don't really share walls with people. But everybody here, they have a very different schedule, and they have their dinner at 10 o'clock, and so everything's just a little bit noisier.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that was, if you've got quite a bit of noise going on and you've got issues with sleeping and things like that, that can also be really, really difficult to deal with while you're going through all the rest of adjustments. But yeah, I mean, I think that would be my biggest culture shock. Yeah.
Well, it's a big one, even for me. Dinner at 10 o'clock, and I am Southern European, but that is too late. But I guess we don't have the siesta. and with that, just before we go to Marianne, did you have any sort of difficulties adjusting to the research environment in Spain? Because I found the research culture, academic culture in Portugal very different from Germany, and definitely very different from the UK. I find the UK people are much more approachable. You don't have those, in my opinion, you don't call people doctor all the time. And those sort of, they are more friendly, I found. Did you have a challenge with that?
I think, I mean, I have had experiences with other countries' research cultures, which I've found very, very different to the New Zealand research culture. I think, and maybe Marianne, you can attest to this, Australians and Kiwis are very informal and very laid back and relaxed quite often. And especially the place that I've been working at, I find that they're also quite informal and relaxed about things. So it wasn't a major adjustment. Definitely there are specific things that people do differently, and times of days that they do things differently. But yeah, luckily it wasn't too much of a shock for me, I don't think.
Great. And we will have much more questions, but without further ado, Dr. Marianne Coleman, I know you don't have slides, so I guess this is an opportunity for us to chat. Do you want us to turn off our microphones?
You can keep them on. It's all good. I'm just going to kind of blather a bit and pick up on a few things that Sara was talking about as well. So yeah, I moved from the UK to Australia, also mid-pandemic, much the same as Sara. I was supposed to have flown out on at the end of March, early April 2020, and my flights got cancelled because Australia was like, no, we don't want any flights coming into our country, and Melbourne Airport actually closed for like a big chunk of the pandemic. So I don't know how much to talk about with regards to moving during the pandemic, because I feel like there's a fair big chunk of my experiences that are maybe less relevant to people that are moving in this sort of less acute phase of the pandemic. I could talk briefly about a few things because it sort of ties in with Sara's comments about the kind of that need for that level of emotional resilience in the face of a lot of change and a lot of disruption. But just to start off with, what everyone's been saying about how kind of laid back Australian researchers are and Kiwi researchers and all the rest of it is absolutely true. So before I came to Melbourne, I was at the University of Surrey, which is where Andreia is now, and they have a great careers service there. And I went to them and I was like, well, look, I've got this job that's going in Australia and I want to apply for it, and have you got any tips for me? And they said, okay, so you're applying for a job in this country. The way they do things is that they have these key selection criteria and your cover letter, and you do it like this. But what they actually told me was to be really, really blunt and completely to the point in the way that I addressed all of these different points, right? And I used ChatGPT to write a cover letter for a job application again not that long ago, and it was so effusive and self-effacing and all the rest of it. And that is just not how you write a cover letter for a job in Australia. It's just completely not like that at all. So yeah, it's definitely a very different kind of attitude and culture and all the rest of it. So I left a permanent job at the University of Surrey to go to a temporary postdoc in Australia, which is a bit bonkers, right? Like I gave up all of that job security to do that. And so yeah, sort of talking about the personal costs and the rewards, like for me, the main motivation for moving to completely the other side of the world was the opportunity to actually have some independence as a researcher. So when I was at the University of Surrey, it was a permanent role, but I didn't really have an identity of my own as a researcher. I was in the School of Health Sciences at the University of Surrey, and my job was to be a floating postdoc. So I was in every research specialty cluster at that department. So my background is that I'm a vision researcher. So I did my PhD in children's vision at Glasgow Cali, and then I moved to the School of Health Sciences at the University of Surrey, which did not have any kind of eye-related stuff going on in there at all. And it was for a digital health postdoc. right? So I was supporting a number of different research topics across a bunch of different areas. I have random papers on the topic of cancer, diabetes, multiple mini interviews for health sciences admissions. Like, my publication record is completely all over the place as a result of my time at Surrey, which is wonderful, honestly. I have so much a broader outlook on things because of having moved away from my niche profession into a more general health services research role, and I learned so much. But the job that I moved across to the other side of the world for was a independent clinical vision research fellow position, and it was a joint post between a university department and a clinical public health optometry services provider in Melbourne. So the research institute that I moved to was the one that invented the vision chart that's used in eye clinics across the country. So from a completely nerdy research perspective, that was my main motivation for moving across to the other side of the world and actually giving up a permanent job supporting other people's research for that opportunity to have a shot at doing my own research. So I've appeared on a few NIHR Dementia Researcher podcasts and events and webinars and things in the past. So my career in dementia research started at Surrey. So I'll always be grateful to the institution for that. I took up a 5-year postdoc at the University of Melbourne. And again, when you're sort of thinking about the personal costs of emigrating for science, it's a long way to move across to the other side of the world for like a 2-year position or a 1-year position. You know what I mean? Like, you've got to be at least vaguely confident that you can make a decent go of things in the time that you have available to you. Sara, how long have you been in Spain? It's been 4 years, right?
Yes, 4 years.
Yeah. So, you want it to be at least a decent length of time to have kind of a fair go at it, right? So having talked a bit about my motivations for actually moving, let's talk about the actual process. So, I moved in the middle of the pandemic. Australia was pretty much closed off to the outside world at that point. The only reason that they even let me come was because I could demonstrate that I had a ongoing position there for a decent chunk of time. And so myself and my partner finally ended up actually making it over to Australia about sort of 3 or 4 months later. I think it was like about mid-July that we finally got to move there after having repeated flights booked and cancelled. And we owned our place in the UK at the time, and so we decided to rent it out while we were away. We wanted to keep the doors open, the option for us being able to come back, because it was a 5-year postdoc. As Sara was saying, there's a lot of planning involved, and in my case, I did leave the door open deliberately for me to come back to the UK if I needed to. And so in Australia, they had the hotel quarantine system. So you come into Australia and you have to do 2 weeks in a hotel in whatever your arrival city is. In my case, it was Sydney, because Melbourne Airport was still closed at the time that I finally managed to get a flight over. So, I had to spend 2 weeks in a hotel in Sydney. That was where I wrote my first successful dementia research grant in Australia. I finished it off in hotel quarantine. And because of the time difference between Australia and the UK, because I was stuck in the UK for a good few months after starting my position, I was doing my PPI with people with lived experience of dementia, people living with dementia on a cattle station in the middle of like rural Australia. And, I'm phoning them up at 3 o'clock in the morning, my time. So during the pandemic, obviously everyone's sleep schedules and everything were completely shot because nobody really had much of a routine, right? So, I came to Australia, and the hotel quarantine experience was a very interesting thing for me because you're not allowed out, right? So in the beginning of the hotel quarantine, they did let people out, to go and sit on the balcony and get some fresh air. But a few people tried to escape during that time. So they banned that. So we were basically stuck in the hotel room for like 2 weeks solid without being able to actually go out of the room at all. Very interesting Stockholm syndrome experience. But because everybody in the hotel was on the internet, because there was nothing else to do, it meant that the best time for me to write my grant was actually at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, because that was when there were fewer people using the internet for me to actually do look at my papers and all the rest of it. So I didn't actually really get over the jet lag in hotel quarantine, because there was no incentive to, because I could use the internet at those other times of the day, So it was a very interesting experience, and the pandemic had actually a huge impact on my integration into my new research environment in Melbourne. My onboarding was completely non-existent, because all of the university HR and everything were all being forced to work from home. So there were a lot of checks and things that were not done. When I first arrived, I had very little information about how to make the most of my new institution. All of the sort of advice that you get about making the most of your institution when you move institutions, I was not able to use at all. So just a bit of information about Melbourne during the pandemic. So Melbourne had one of the most prolonged and protracted set of lockdowns, and the most restrictive in that pandemic period. So from 2020 to 2022, I barely went anywhere or did anything during that time. And I don't know if Shara's experiences were a little bit similar in that initial period, that sort of 2021 period when moving, but all of the advice about integrating into a new community, I lived my life on Discord, basically. I was like going, the whole kind of hobbies stuff. I do arts and crafts and sewing and all the rest of it. I was just like living on Discord communities for much of the pandemic, rather than actually going out and meeting people and actually building an in-person support network. So the pandemic also had other impacts upon my move. So we shipped all of our stuff, as I'm sure Shara did, from New Zealand to Spain, and actually our stuff was stuck in the harbour for a good sort of 2 or 3 months after we actually schlepped it all out of our house. So we actually had to do without all of our personal effects and possessions beyond what we actually brought with us in our suitcases for about 6 months. So my partner could not deal with the fact that all of their PC components, monitors and everything were all still on a boat, or rather still in a harbour somewhere, and actually bought a whole new computer, because they were having to deliver lectures. My partner is also an academic working in computing, and so it's just like I can't not have a proper PC, So we had to do without all of our stuff. In Victoria, when you're trying to find accommodation to stay in, that's also a thing. So my university, my position, because I was moving from abroad, it did actually come with some relocation expenses. The relocation expenses did not cover the true financial cost of emigrating to Australia. The cost of flights went up during the pandemic, because there were fewer flights, obviously, and they were at a real premium because everybody wanted to get on them. And the cost of shipping were obviously very large. It was about £1,800 to ship about 70 odd boxes of stuff. But the thing is, the relocation expenses, they don't cover some of the other things. So we moved into a completely unfurnished flat when we got out of hotel quarantine to go into Melbourne. We obviously couldn't view any flats or anything, so we took a flat completely based on a video walkthrough, which was actually in Victoria. You're meant to inspect things in person, and if you can't inspect in person, you have to send somebody else to do it for you. Obviously very, very difficult in the middle of a lockdown. So especially when it's a brand new university. I've been to Melbourne literally once before in my whole life, and didn't know anyone, right? And I had to get my line manager, who I had not met in person, to be my referee for some of my accommodation applications, because you need a referee for that and you don't know anybody. And so, we moved into this flat, and it was completely unfurnished. And I was very lucky that the head of the Orthotic Association in Australia was living in Melbourne, and she very kindly put some camping equipment of hers out on the verge because it was the lockdown, so I couldn't actually go to her house or anything, you know. And we did a drive-by in the hire car to from the airport to our accommodation after we got out of hotel quarantine to pick up all of that stuff. And yeah, so you need all new furniture. I mean, we were trying to like sell all of our existing furniture in the UK on Facebook Marketplace during the pandemic and during all of these brief kind of lockdown periods that we had in the UK as well. So again, fun times for everyone. So yeah, so it's not just about the actual costs of moving. It's also, you know, yeeting all of your furniture and having to buy new stuff, because it's more expensive to move your furniture than it is to just buy new stuff from IKEA. So we yeeted all of our IKEA furniture in the UK and immediately went to IKEA in Australia and bought some more. So, you know, there's just a whole bunch of things like that. And so the planning that Sara was talking about is really important. It does take time to pack up your whole life and get your things together and all the rest of it. And actually, like if you are in a position, don't agree to like the soonest available start date. Like I asked for a good sort of 4 or 5 months as part of mine. So I got the job offer in November and I negotiated a April start date. And the interesting thing for me as well was that during the time that I was in the UK, I was being paid for starting remotely. I managed to negotiate a remote start for my job during the pandemic. And I was being paid into an Australian bank account, but they would not give me my bank card or bank account details or any of that kind of stuff. So I did have my bank account details, but I couldn't actually access any of the money in that account until I went into a branch in Australia. So for the first 3 months of my post in Australia, I could not access my salary. And so my partner had to actually bankroll us for the first 3 months of my new job because I could not access that money at all. So, you know, it was a very interesting time to have lived through. But I have no regrets about doing the move. Australian academics are very well paid compared to their UK counterparts. So I received a £12,000 pay increase just by taking a job in Australia versus having one here. It makes it very difficult to come back because, you know, again, from a financial perspective, it's like, okay, I can move back to the UK. That's great, but I'm taking a massive pay cut as a result. And I'm on a like pretty sort of basic level postdoc salary here in Australia, and it's like quite a substantial pay difference. So, you know, there were definitely financial benefits to moving. I would also say that the other difficulty that we experienced was with my partner coming with us. Australia has one of the most expensive partner visas in the world. And there is a whole process to kind of go through for that. Sara, you mentioned that you had to apply for a long-term visa in Australia. I'm actually a dual citizen. I actually have Australian and UK citizenship. I was actually, like, my accent doesn't show it because I moved to the UK a long time ago, but I was actually born in Western Australia. So it was fine for me, but my partner's a British citizen. So yeah, like it sounds like you said you moved for love, Sara. I take it your partner has citizenship in Spain. Is that right? Yeah. So, you know, you're kind of having to go through that partner visa kind of experience, really. And yeah, I mean, it was a ridiculous amount of paperwork. Like, you know, you're trying to get to grips with a new job while also getting to grips with all of that stuff as well. We had to provide so much evidence for proof of our relationship, even though we'd already been married for like a good sort of 5 years or so before coming over. Yeah, it was like £3,500. That's how much the partner visa costs in Australia. It's a huge amount of money. So the other thing as well is that the bottom fell out of the higher education sector in Australia during the pandemic, much as the same as it did in the UK. So my partner has a permanent academic position in the UK, and so we got a bit of a permanent two-body problem going on, as they like to call it. And so my partner is still working in the UK. So my partner does 6 months in the UK and 6 months in Australia. So that's definitely the emotional cost of the personal cost of emigrating for science for me, is the fact that we are apart for half of our time together because my partner was not able to get a job in Australia. So just to briefly move on to the academic and research landscape here, because that was definitely a culture shock for me. So if you want to get an academic job in Australia, so I took a research job. So they have research focused and academic focused positions here. My partner is a teaching academic in the UK, a teacher on the computing science program at Brunel University. And in Australia, it's very hard to get a teaching position if you have not already been in the Australian academic system as a casual or sessional lecturer. And that is just due to the way that employment regulations work here. They have a very strong preference for hiring people that have taught for them previously on that casual academic status. And so my partner only being here for half the year because of their teaching commitments in the UK, it's very difficult for them to actually build up a teaching track record in Australia to be eligible for a lot of these posts. So my partner's also an early career academic. They're only they're sort of 5 years post PhD at this point. And yeah, at the time that they were applying for a lot of positions in Australia, they just didn't have the kind of module leadership experience and all the rest of it to be competitive against all of these sessional academics in Australia who know the system and know the modules and know the level of teaching that's expected. And so they were just not able to. They came close a few times, but have not yet been able to secure a position here. So there's definitely some interesting considerations for me, which is part of the reason that I have very much kept a foot in both countries, both Australia and the UK. And as I mentioned, I'm actually coming back to the UK for a family visit very shortly. And that is another cost. It is another cost if you want to go home, if you want to see people and stay in touch with people. And that connection is very, very important. Shara said about video calls. They're an absolute lifeline for me as well. I WhatsApp my family on a regular basis. We do like a group video call at Christmas. During the pandemic, when we were all stuck in our respective homes, we had family quizzes and things like that. So, you know, stuff like that is really, really helpful. But I mean, sometimes you just want a hug from your mum. Right? Like sometimes that's just what you want, right? And so, yeah, I'm really looking forward to going back next week and seeing everybody. That'll be really, really nice. I think some other sort of cultural things, the landscape in Australia for research is very, very competitive. The average grant success rate for a lot of these government level and sort of even the philanthropic grants are very, very competitive. It's about 10%. Sometimes it's as low as 4%. It's very, very difficult. And I think the main kind of message I have, if you're thinking of moving to Australia for an academic career, don't count on getting anything after your contract finishes. So I had the possibility for 2 months extension at mine. But again, the employment regulations are such that you cannot hold multiple fixed term contracts. Once you've had more than 2 years in a fixed term contract, and mine was 5, if they wanted to hire me again for another post, they needed to make it permanent. And again, times are hard for universities all over the world. It's a very difficult time for higher education for everyone in any country. My heart really goes out to everyone in America right now for similar kind of reasons. Yeah, I found myself unemployed at the end of my contract. So I had a 5-year contract, and it was very clear in my contract that it was, you know, that it was the contract duration was what it was. But there was a small part of me that hoped that if I performed well in my posts, that they might be able to find money from somewhere. It was not. They did not, because if they had done, they would have had to have made it permanent, and they did not want to commit to that. In Australia, they have this thing called a research contingent permanent post. It's not permanent. Like if you don't have funding, you're out. That's it. Forget it. Even professors are on research contingent contracts in Australia. So there are very few people in the academic system in Australia that actually have genuine job security. And for that reason, the funding landscape is hideously competitive. And, you know, even the people that are in very senior positions where by rights they really ought to have that secure funding, they are trying to manipulate the system to retain funding for their position. And so, you know, if it's a academic funding opportunity that only early to mid-career researchers are eligible for, then they will get somebody else in their lab to bring in that money for them, and that funds the lab as a whole. You know, so it can be a very difficult environment to be in as an early career researcher. I'm very fortunate to have another 2 years of job security right now. After 4 months of unemployment, I was successful in obtaining a 2-year fellowship. What happens after that, I don't know. I'm very lucky to have a clinical qualification. At the end of the day, nobody can take my clinical degree away from me and my clinical skills. So, you know, I'll always have a fallback option. But just be aware that if you are taking a temporary position in Australia, that it might, you know, you might find yourself having to look at your other options when you come to the end of your contract. So it is a very transient working environment in Australia, and even if you try your very best in your position and do loads of really awesome things, I'm really proud of what I achieved in my 5 years at Melbourne. Sometimes that's just not enough if the money's just not there, or they decide that they want somebody else who's got, you know, perceived higher capacity to bring in the different sort of tiers of funding that they like to see. So, you know, it's just a kind of a sober cautionary note. I don't want to end on a bummer. So, you know, I think I'd like to finish with some top tips. So, try to go through things and get out there. Obviously, the pandemic made it difficult for me, but I've been to some wonderful places in Australia as a result of my time here. Australia is a beautiful country. I'm really lucky to live on the south coast. And it is beautiful, honestly, and getting to see other parts of Australia as well through dementia research. So the Australian Dementia Research Forum is over in Western Australia this year, so looking forward to heading back to my home state to spend some time there, and try and meet people as much as you can. Melbourne is like the coffee capital of Australia, so everyone loves going out for coffee. Any excuse to go out for coffee, and you know, sometimes you move to a country and it's a big country. Like America's enormous, Australia's huge. You know, it's like a 5-hour flight to go from Melbourne to Perth, right? It's not small, right? And so email is wonderful. Just email random people, like, you know, especially if it's a big country, right? Because you know, you just got to put yourself out there, really, if you really want to kind of get to know people. Yeah, just give yourself time, as Shara was saying. Embrace the challenge of it, because, you know, you will come out a very different person at the end of it. And it's character building. I know it's a really trite statement, but like, I definitely feel like I have, by going out of my comfort zone for emigrating for science, I've definitely evolved a lot of kind of personal resilience. I think definitely the experiences that I've had in Australia have very much shaped who I am as a researcher and the way that I work. So, you know, I definitely recommend it to anyone, but as Shara was saying, plan, give yourself time, be kind to yourself. Don't expect to hit the ground running straight away. Do your best, but you know, sometimes circumstances can be out of your control, like a pandemic, for example. And keep the door open in your home country. You never know when something might come up. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be forever. That was how I kind of diddled myself into taking that position in the end. I was like, it's a 5-year contract. I can come back if I want to. And I'm still here now. So, and I will be for the next few years. So we'll just see what the future holds. And that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. We have no questions in the chat, but we do have 3 people in the chat. So do send us our questions, but because we only have sort of 7 minutes, I think we can stay live. It was so wonderful hearing from both of you. And it's that, you know, I've just finished my PhD, again, doing the corrections. I've started this sort of research fellow, it's a postdoc, you know, academia has so many names as well, sort of post. And it's that it took me a long time to figure out what I want to do next. You know, I'm not in this post, I'm not in dementia research, but I felt like I needed a little break of that topic because I have so many topics I want to work on. I mean, I trained as a clinical psychologist back in Portugal. I never actually done clinical work after the university because I thought I actually like research. I feel like, I had too much of myself to learn to help other people. But I resonate with what you were saying, Marianne, having that clinical skills to fall back on, just in case, but also, to merge the clinical and the research as well. And the other thing that I've been thinking about now as I'm navigating, because I am on a fixed term contract, it always says what comes next. Sort of like a year before your contract ends or 6 months, you already have to start thinking about your next job, because whether you are on a visa, I came to the UK straight after Brexit. So the visa cost for me was ridiculous. I had started working after my master's for 6 months, and then it was the pandemic. And then all my savings were for visas. And then I started my PhD online because of visa and the pandemic and all these things. And I sort of like, okay, it's 3 years, 4 years, I can do this. I will see what comes next after. I was very fortunate to be at Surrey. I'm loving my time. But now is that sense of like, what do I do next? Apply for funding. But it's always that thinking ahead, because you have to pay the bills, whether you're immigrating for science or not,
Mm-hmm.
That can be very scary. And, adds a whole lot of emotional, social, and economic costs. Like, I've been thinking about, okay, if I go back to Portugal, the UK, or Australia, but if you have a partner, you also have to deal with the emotional fallout of your partner also have to come with you or not come with you. All of these things. It's like never-ending cycle of doubt and having to think ahead, and it can be very frustrating. But at the same time, like you both said, it is a great opportunity that comes at a cost. But I think I'm much better for having left my home country. I'm much better for, I grew up in a hometown that has 100 people maybe. So it's very small, So, all of these things shape us and make us better people, but also researchers, right?
Yeah.
But it's a lot to deal with. And when I started my PhD, that's when I started therapy, I have to say.
Yes, get a therapist.
Yeah,
Get a therapist.
Absolutely. That I had to tell her, like, I need to go home. And she had to validate me and say, it's okay to go home. And at the sort of the last year of my PhD, last few months, I was going home. My mom lives in Germany. So I was going either to Germany or to Portugal every month and a half. I felt so bad about it. But I just sort of, I needed that. So I just needed to check in a week or two and come back. Because, I moved by myself. So you're so close, but you're also so far away because then everybody else is doing their own thing. In my case, I only had one other friend in Germany doing a PhD. So that's another level of complexity. It's like nobody can understand what I'm going through with this, research. So, yeah. Anyway, I think...
I'm just answering Rohit's question in the chat about people I've come across who come after MSCs to Australia. I get a lot of PhD student inquiries, Rohit. People have a very scattergun approach to doing that kind of initial mail shot to academics in Australia, saying, "Hey, I want to come and do a PhD with you." The main thing is that every time I get one of the inquiries and somebody attaches their CV or whatever, that doesn't help us because the university's entry system requirements are really, really strict. And if you don't have a transcript with your GPA and all the rest of it on it, then they won't even look at you. So you have to wait until you've got your transcript. Because they have this really complicated point system that they use for PhD admissions in Australia. And depending on where you've studied, because you've done your MSc in the UK, you should be probably pretty all right. But they dock massive amounts of points from your score if you come from a university that's not on their special list of universities we like. However, I think I would say there are a lot of universities in Australia, and they're mostly concentrated in the big cities. So if you're kind of a bit worried about your GPA for doing a PhD in Australia or any kind of academic work, then it's worth trying for the smaller and more regional unis, because they're not quite as snooty as some of the big institutions, your kind of University of Melbourne and University of Queensland and all those guys. They tend to have very high GPA requirements. So yeah, I would say the PhD system in Australia is quite huge. They have a lot of PhD positions. They have these sort of doctoral training centres very similar to the UK.
Mm-hmm.
So you can absolutely try your luck in terms of applying, but just be aware that if you don't have your transcript, you're going to make limited progress in terms of actually getting through the system. The other useful bit of info that I can provide you is that they usually do 2 intakes a year for the doctoral training. So October and July are usually the application deadlines. So if you're trying to put in at a different time of the year, you might find that you have to wait to start. So just keep your options open in terms of employment while you're waiting to hear back and to go through that process.
Thank you so much. And with that, I will close the salon. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, Sara, for sharing your experiences. And if you have any other questions, I'm sure you can email either of us, and we would be happy to share. And you can then rewatch the recording, I think, in a couple of weeks' time on YouTube. Thank you so much to both of you, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.